Let's take a walk together back memory lane. Let's go back to 7 AD and 64 AD. You see, one thing that you need to understand with the crusade, the aim of the crusade was to bring over 20 million Africans and Asians into El Kibuan to wage war against the Bantus that were at that time disadvantaged due to some decivilization and enslavement that took place millennia back in Babylon, South America, Guatemala, when they were enslaved by the Egyptians and the Babylonians. So upon being reinstated in their land, El Kibula and Israel, they were not given equal rights as a state in as far as full self-determination by the Persian Empire. You understand, as to can be able to build their own military. They were under military sanctions in a very same manner that you see Iran being orchestrated to be a state that is not fully determined in as far as sovereignty is concerned. They seek to influence the outcome of its military. In a very sense, they did to El Kibulan of the Vatos. Now, you need to come into understanding of that particular fact, because that's gonna give you a clue right through this whole entire shenanigan. So the other thing that we need to look at is the fact that the phenotype of El Kibulan, of Tuka, of Turania, of El Kibulan prior to the invasion and conquest in 64 AD by the Crusaders, which are the Africans and the Terracans of Teresia, and also the Asians of Siberia, Ludia, and all these other places, when the world was still organic, and the only conquered and ethnically cleansed place was the place of Zetskis, or the so-called Darius the Great of Persia. Tyre was the only conquered place. So after they conquered Persia, they then moved around and come from the northern side into Ilkibulan. You understand? In the war against the kingdoms of the Bantus, in destroying them, raping the women, spraying their seed while they unalive the men. This is the tactic of the Greeks, or the so-called the Africans. And then in so doing, they concocted a newborn race on the face of El Kibulan, and this race became known as other races outside of the Jew Bantu El Kibulan, to a point that even the guy you call Japhet became Jewish, because then he looked like the Bantu, whereas in antiquity, Japhet or Chapeto or Chapeta was not Jewish. The only people that were Jewish, meaning looking like the Bantus, were North Americans, the Sotos or the Sota. So, as due to this conquest and concentration, mass grape, in order to reproduce the Bentoid Gehima and the Bentoid Syria. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a Bentoid Syria, and this is a Bentoid Gehima, is an African. So they concocted this sort of race out of inbreeding the military, the men, into the captured women. You understand that? And that is, and they were known, they called the native Wa, abbreviation for Wana, which is the same as Bantu. And then this one, because they are the Rai and the Lai. Remember, Asia has got two councils, or rather three councils, but we know phenotypically it's two councils. It's two council of the Terracans. It's called the Persians and the Etruscans, or the Teresians, or the Khazarian rather. Let me put it correctly. It's the Khadarians and the Khazarian. But they're all Etruscan. They're all Terracan. And then we have the Proto-Asian phenotype, which is called the Lai. Now, the Khadarians and the Khazarians are called the Rai, R-I. Now, because of the conquest of El Kibulan was planned by the R.I. of Rome, the Terracans of Rome, the Khazarians, all Asians that breathed themselves into El Kibulan were called the Rai Ngwari. And then you get the famous Africans, which is the Nguni, or the Nguni Onwanu. You understand? These things were concocted in 64 AD after the conquest and consolidation of victory over the Batu, the Toucans, us, the Bantus, the Turanians. Now you can see we have given you medical signs of this explanation, where you can see this is a Turanian skull, which is a Bantu skull, the Hebrew skull, or the so-called Adamic skull. Then we have the Asian skull, which is the Terracans and the Median skull. And then we have the prognatic brachycephalic African skull. And that is the whole concoction and commotion of the history that took place on this continent of Magepula. Ladies and gentlemen, from me, Baraka B, Ventuka of all Ventukas, I want to say, see me when I see you. Ciao, ciao.